Give me one moment.
This meeting is now being recorded.
Welcome everyone, this is Ashley Klein-Jimenez from Prevent Connect, and I'm happy to welcome you all to our second session in this peer learning forum titled Linked Yet Distinct, Prevention of Sexual and Intimate Partner Violence. Our second session is titled Framing a Unified Field. Throughout this series, we're exploring intentionally linking the fields of sexual and intimate partner violence prevention as a strategic way to really leverage resources, increase visibility and sustainability to create a unified and strong presence. Prevent Connect is a national program of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, sponsored by U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information provided in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the U.S. government, CDC, or CalCASA. So I'm excited to invite back our presenter and facilitator today, Leah Aldridge. Leah is one of my colleagues here at CalCASA, California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and Leah is also the author of a report that we highlighted on the first session called Reciprocal Advancement, Building Linkages Between Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. Leah has been a part of the anti-violence against women's movement since 1989, and I am so excited to have you back, Leah. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. Can everyone hear me? I mean, can you hear me, Ashley?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay, good.
So,
excellent.
Yeah.
Technology will not get the best of us, so there. So yes, I'm good, and thank you so much for that wonderful introduction.
Absolutely.
Okay, do you want me to take it from there?
Sure, Leah. I've given you the podium, so you should be able to advance your slides.
Okay, fantastic. And I really would like for this to be as much of a discussion as we can, you know, we can make that happen given the way technology is bringing us together and all of that fabulous stuff. And so it will, what we'll start off with is just a very, very, very quick review of what we covered, our overall goal for these 3 peer learning sessions, thinking about how we work the 2 fields together of domestic or intimate partner violence and sexual violence together. So I want to quickly review our overarching goals for all of that kind of content with these peer learning forums. And so this is really about, as Ashley said, it's a narrow focus, and it's thinking about ways in which we can reimagine the way that we have worked so diligently over the last 40+ years. And how do we reimagine this work as unified? How do we reimagine sexual and intimate partner violence as linked and yet distinct? We want to make sure that we are thinking about when we work that way that we have outcomes that are going to benefit the working in either of those fields. And we want to make sure that we are thinking about strategies that are going to help us meet those outcomes, that are going to mobilize people and create tighter or stronger bonds. So as part of our review, we spent a little bit of time of going over the research. We talked about the both the Reciprocal Advancement report that Ashley mentioned, but we also talked about the sexual assault, Ashley, SADI. Can you remind us what that stands for, pretty please?
Yeah, and I'm actually going to pull up a link for everyone. Or Megna, if you have that, you can do that. But this was a report that was really looking at dual domestic violence and sexual assault organizations and finding that the majority of communities were recognizing these organizations based on their domestic violence work. So we'll put that link up in just a second.
Okay, terrific. So the research was showing that it made sense for us to work more closely together, that there were distinctions in both advocacy as well as prevention in the way in which we respond to incidents of both sexual and intimate partner violence. So there is a need to pay attention to the particularity of each of these issues, of these social ills. But we can overcome those challenges. In terms of moving forward, we're going to be talking about overcoming those challenges on the next peer leading forum, where we're talking about leadership, and leadership being really a key to making this transformation happen. But today we're thinking about how do we brand ourselves. We have to think about ourselves differently, and then what would that look like as a brand. And I know that some people may bristle from thinking about this work in those kinds of terms, but it's a useful construct to help invigorate, reinvigorate, reemerge, reprioritize the way in which we go about doing this because of some of the very real-world threats and weaknesses that both sexual and intimate partner violence deal with on a daily basis. And so it was also real clear in looking at the literature that prevention was an obvious or a really good place for us to begin that discussion. So one of the questions that we had last time around was, how have you already discussed in your work the connection between sexual assault and intimate partner violence in linked yet distinct ways? And these were your responses, some of the responses that people put in the chat box when last we gathered. You guys didn't know that you were going to be built into the next peer learning forum, did you? Did you? You'll like, should we think about what we're going to put in that chat box? Just kidding. It's fabulous. So I'm sorry, I'm having a technical difficulty, but I'm working it out.
Cool. So while you do that, Leah, some of the responses that people mentioned were, folks were collaborating through consortiums, forming committees or caucuses. So an SV and IPV caucus that would then look at another specific issue. Folks were looking at the linkages between intimate partner violence and sexual violence in some of the social norms work that they were doing in prevention. Focusing on promoting healthy relationships was really getting to sexual violence and intimate partner violence prevention strategies and efforts. And then there was a conversation about, sometimes people want to talk about one issue. But so if the community or stakeholders are interested in talking about intimate partner violence, how can we then use that as an entry point to also talk about sexual violence? So those were some of the great comments and ways that folks are already talking about intimate partner violence and sexual violence in a linked way.
Good. Thank you very much for that, Ashley. So if you notice the little image in the center is thinking about the visuals. I'm hoping the visuals are helpful. If you think about the me and the you, the overlap as the us becomes what we want to focus on and what we want to think about in terms of branding and messaging. And if we are to, it's clear based on people's feedback that we know how to do this. We have a particular kind of comfort level already. Some people are, have more experience in one arena or the other, but based on this, people's feedback, we know how to do it. We know how to do it on the ground. So I'm wondering what happens if we think about the responses as strategies that leverage one field in support of another to advance both. If we think about those as strategies to move the entire field forward, right, as opposed to access points or activities or events, if we think about them as a method toward elevating people's awareness and consciousness about the need for us to address both sexual and intimate partner violence together, right? So I just want people to ponder that for just a moment. Because in theory, one of the things that could happen is that we could have a transformation happening to the movement itself. So if you see the little graphic there, I hope you like vegetable soup. I hope everybody on here likes vegetable soup. One of the major problems or concerns or challenges that people had when we began talking about reciprocal advancement and a unified field and being linked yet, which eventually led us to a conversation about being linked yet distinct, was how do we retain the characteristics of the different constitutive elements of a unified field, yet also present ourselves in a together kind of way? So one of the ways we began talking about it was, food is a nice way for us to have these conversations. So when we're thinking about soup, we have carrots and we have potatoes, right? And when we put them together, the carrots always remain carrots and the potatoes always remain potatoes. But when you mix the two together, you come up with a new something, right? You come up with a new something along with these other elements called soup. It's no longer just carrots or just potatoes, but now we have something called soup. And the combination of the two transforms both. So the carrot is no longer the way it was prior to being put in the soup, nor is the potato. They both are altered in some way, but we are still able to discern their difference and their distinctive qualities. Similarly, if we're thinking about sexual violence and intimate partner violence, we want to imagine the way in which we could, formulate our own soup, if you will, that allows us to retain the distinctive character and quality of each of those fields, yet when you put this together, it is transformed into something new. It's not just sexual violence, it's not just intimate partner violence, but something new emerges that this symbol that we introduced last time we were together represents. And so I'm wondering what people are thinking right now. If we could, I don't know if we need to open up the lines, but I'm curious to know what people's thoughts are about either my soup metaphor, I hope you like it, or this idea of coming together to create something new that allows us to retain our distinctiveness, but to formulate something new in and of itself. Ashley, do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, well, so I just want to say for folks who are thinking about that and answering that, you're free to use the text chat. Thank you, Rebecca, who's already done that. But if you would like to come on the phone with us, you just need to press *6 on your end, and then we'll be able to hear you. So feel free to do that. But Leah, Rebecca says that, if you use the blender in the soup, the distinctiveness would be lost. And right, that would become some kind of puree that you wouldn't really be able to pick out this distinctiveness of each of, in the soup metaphor, the vegetables. And so I think, the soup metaphor kind of lets me see this distinctiveness, but then also, like you're saying, Leah, this transformation, that we're actually creating something new. And so Rebecca says, so we won't blend our work, but work side by side. What are your thoughts on that, Leah?
I think that's absolutely right on, and thank you, Rebecca, for advancing the metaphor. Yay! Rebecca gets the game. Yay! And I think that's an important distinction to make, because sometimes we can move too fast. Sometimes we can locate ourselves in not the best mixture for being able to do this kind of work. Sometimes we, people think that, for example, prevention, and this is going to be particularly interesting around doing prevention work, that because an obvious link for sexual violence and intimate partner violence is prevention, and thinking about the root causes of that, well, we'll just talk about violence against women, or we'll just talk about gender-based violence as a way of umbrellaing or being inclusive and making sure that we are talking about both at the same time. But sometimes when we just talk about gender-based violence, we can lose our distinctiveness, right? So we want to make sure that we're in as Kathleen says, thinking about the broth that makes the soup. It becomes complex, similar to our field, absolutely. So that means that I think that we have to make sure that we're paying attention to what is in that mixture, what's in that broth, what helps us to sustain it, what helps us to really just pay attention, pay greater attention so that we don't lose the flavor. Sometimes we have to add more carrots. Sometimes we have to add peas or other things to bolster. When things start to get too mushy, we have to pay attention to the structure and the fiber and what will happen to that soup mixture. Deborah's mentioning that the soup metaphor and thinking about additional distinctions of other work that also build the mix. Exactly. Child maltreatment, elder abuse, human trafficking, Black Lives Matter. I think that what really allows us to be, with our soup metaphor, and I'm conscious about a melting pot or a kind of fruit salad approach to this. But what's helpful about just thinking about the soup is that we eventually get to a place where we're talking about prevention and health promotion across the board in terms of all of our different social ills, right? It allows us to make these connections but retain our distinctiveness. Because where we really need to become, one of the ways in which we become very distinct is in our response. Our response is to sexual assault as opposed to our responses to intimate partner violence, or the way in which we want to address elder abuse, because we know that if we've got multi-generational families living in a home, if there's domestic violence going on, then there's a good chance that there might be some elder abuse going on, and there's a good chance that there might be some child abuse going on, but it's all in the same, located within the same house. So this soup allows us to build a mixture that allows us to address the distinctiveness of everything, but wrap our collective arms around the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think Lori's point, Leah, is really important, right? So continuing to battle over whose ingredient or whose piece of the pie is more important. We don't allow any of this transformation to happen. We're not able to move forward. We're not able to imagine new ways of advancing our work.
I completely agree. And Lori, I appreciate you bringing that up, because one of the, and that's going to be incredibly important next week when we talk about leadership, because in the research, in the materials that we addressed or we pointed to at the beginning of this conversation, one of the biggest obstacles and hurdles was the kind of tensions between sexual assault and domestic violence around money, who is in terms of funding, and what kind of public awareness or public attention one issue receives over the other. And so, there's this kind of domestic violence gets more attention than sexual assault. No, sexual assault gets more attention than domestic violence. And it just creates this tension that we will have to overcome. And the leadership in the various ways in which we do this work, pockets of where we do this work, will have to remember the distinctiveness but continue to build the whole soup. So Lori, thank you for that. But we're going to have to, there's some, I don't want to say bad blood, but there are people feel some kind of way across the two fields, and so we will have to pay really good attention to the broth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yes, we have to stop that. Yes, I agree. So were there any other thoughts about that one, about the way in which we transform, so it'll no longer be just sexual assault or intimate partner violence, but it will transform into something new? Okay. So, Jessica makes an interesting point. Go ahead. Was that Ashley?
No, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Go ahead, say it.
Yeah, so Jessica's point that there's a tension between prevention and intervention. And we started to have a conversation around the importance, our prevention work is only as good as our advocacy work last time. So I think that that's an important, piece of this that we also have to take into account. My text chat just disappeared, but hopefully
everybody's did.
Okay, it's not
mine disappeared too.
All right,
so
we'll work on that.
Should we test? Should we send a test?
Yeah, it looks like we can start a new one. Great. So we have another discussion question for you, and I'm gonna pose this, and then Leah, I want you to kind of talk about what you mean by all of this. But in a linked yet distinct movement, what could our brand promise, value, and positioning be? And Leah, I feel like I need a little more distinction into that. So if you wouldn't, we'll go ahead and put that in the question in the text chat. But if you wouldn't mind going a little bit deeper into what you mean about promise, value, and positioning when it comes to a brand. I'd appreciate
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely, no problem. So I'm going to jump back once. And in thinking about this blended ribbon, right, and that's not it. That's just what we're working with right now as a visual for everybody. Figuring out what the iconography would be of the transformed movement would, that, oh God, I don't even know that I'll be in that room. But, so we're going to just discuss this for now, right, the blended ribbon. So if we're thinking about the brand promise, the value, and the positioning of that ribbon, blended ribbon, why don't I go ahead and break it down a little bit. So the brand promise is why we matter. It's what we know that we will deliver every time we are engaged as a transformed movement. It's why it's important to engage with this transformed entity, right? It's the promise. It's this buds for you. It's whatever the golden arches is. It's like, you know, it's a Coke and a smile, change the world. If you drink this Coke, we'll change the world, right? It's why it is setting itself out, why it's important that you pay attention to that particular entity. It's the brand value is what the brand believes in, its core beliefs, what it stands for, right? So one of the complaints that, you know, in the prevention, I want to really applaud the prevention community for challenging those of us who did a lot of advocacy work before moving into the prevention arena. Not that they are really, there's a hard line between the two, but some of us have had an opportunity to hang out more in one or the other and what have you. But prevention really challenged advocates to think about, we know what you're against, but what are you for, right? So we're against rape, we're against battering, we're against child abuse, right? But then when we started thinking about prevention work, we had to really think about, well, what do we stand for, right? And so our brand value really advances this idea of when you see that icon, we know what we stand for, and the public can then align themselves politically or ideologically because they have similar values, right? And our brand positioning is, how do we, as a transformed movement, distinguish what we do from others in the field who are doing similar work? So, you know, cola is just cola, right? But what's the positioning of Coke over Pepsi, over RC? Well, you folks back east, y'all know about RC Cola, right? So how do we best position our distinctiveness from everybody else? What will this transformed movement do differently than what everybody else, right? So there's a couple of ways we can think about this. Understand that the brand symbolizes and embodies messaging. And messaging is a continuation, or it is a communication. It is an extension of that promise, those values, and that positioning or that distinctiveness. Mm-hmm. Does everybody get that? So this logo is, you know, kind of the symbolic stand-in for what we promise, what we value, and how we are distinct, right? And then our messaging communicates that out there. I'm wondering if there are any questions or comments.
Yeah, if anyone has questions or comments as we kind of look at this and think about promise and value and positioning of the field in a linked yet distinct way, we'd love to see that through the text chat. And again, *6 is all you need to press to come on the phone with us. But I think, Leah, so if you're looking at this this ribbon, and someone pointed out before we lost our text chat that it looks like the suicide prevention ribbon. But if we're looking at this ribbon and we're seeing it as kind of this linked yet distinct identity for this transformed movement that we're talking about, the brand promise, the brand value, and the brand positioning should all be communicated through that. Is that right?
Wait, say that again? I was still thinking about the suicide prevention ribbon, and I'm trying to remember the suicide prevention ribbon. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's what happens when there's ribbons, so many ribbons for everything and not enough colors. But so would a symbol, would the way that we talk about our work, would that highlight our promise, our value, and our positioning through an image like this? Okay.
Well, what happens is that more we get our messaging across, the more effective we are with them, the more honed our messaging is, and the more our culture is saturated with our messaging. The more saturation that is, then eventually the brand, the logo gets to stand in for the messaging. So wherever it appears, people automatically connect the image or the symbol with the messaging. Mm-hmm. So the messaging is where the grinding, rolling up the sleeves and the work, and we already have the work. We just have to frame, we have to put messaging around much of the work that's already being done, and then we're building it from the ground up as opposed to top down, right? But so that the symbol, like the golden arches, right, when we see the golden arches, there's a lot of messaging. There's like 50 years of messaging that has been associated with the golden arches, right? Because it's just a symbol. But unless you imbue the symbol with meaning, it doesn't have any purpose for us, right? Mm-hmm. So the messaging becomes the way in which we imbue the symbol with meaning.
That makes sense.
But we have to figure out what that meaning is. And that's the way we brand our work. So you brand it with messaging, promising, values, all that kind of stuff. We have a couple of comments over here. Rebecca says in Ohio, both Ohio Domestic Violence Network and Alliance Against Sexual Violence are not against. We are the network and the alliance. Philosophically, that's interesting. Yeah. A lot of us have to struggle with, well, what do we stand for? I know what we're against, but what do we stand for? And then Jessica points out that when you have resources, it's a little easier. Jessica, did you want to unmute your phone and expand a little bit on that, or are you good with what's in here? Otherwise, I'll just move on. Or if other people had questions with specifically around brand and question the relationship between brand identity and framing and messaging. Okay, and Jessica's good. Excellent. Okay, so we have an example from prevention. And prevention has really done a good job of focusing and creating a focus and identify the commonalities at the root of intimate partner violence and sexual assault. And as a result has been able to, I don't want to say move faster, but been able to make certain strides in advancing ideas and methods and approaches and policy around prevention work. So as opposed to intervention and advocacy work with survivors and clients. So, you know, our response to intimate partner violence and sexual assault, such as imminent threat, is very different than our response to working with adults molested as children, if, you know, we're thinking about the response to it. So anyway, but any given survivor may be dealing with both, right? When you think about the lifespan and how people are dealing with maybe sexual abuse as a child, maybe sexually assaulted as a teen, maybe that makes them predisposed to abusive relationships as they move into young adulthood, and so on. So I'm painting this very bleak picture, but we know that in doing this work, people can experience both, and so prevention does a good job of identifying whatever that mixture is at the bottom. I don't know if it's sexism, I don't know if it's misogyny, I don't know if it's patriarchy, I don't know if it's I don't know how people are kind of identifying root causes in sexism as a risk factor for rape and battery. I know that is at the core of a lot of that discussion. So how do we take these ideas and apply them specifically to prevention? Because we've got shared goals, we've got shared content, we've got shared risk and protective factors. Certainly working sexual violence and intimate partner violence together allows us a more efficient use of resources. It allows us to maintain consistency in the work and some continuity. And it allows us to think about the what are we for, right? It allows us to kind of highlight the what are we for as if nothing else as an outcome. So how do we think about our value, our positioning, and our promise around prevention? Anybody have any ideas? Anybody have any ideas? What's our promise? What's prevention's promise? What are prevention's values? And then what, from thinking about prevention, how does prevention distinguish itself from, and this has been a long-going conversation, from doing mass education at high school assemblies, right? Prevention has had to work very hard to say no, doing mass educational presentations in high school assemblies. That's not what we really mean by prevention.
Right.
Right? So
yeah,
how do we distinguish prevention from the mass presentations? Go ahead, Ashley, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, so I think it's interesting. It would be interesting to hear from our audience about, talking specifically about prevention. What is the promise of prevention if we're linking sexual and intimate partner violence? What is the promise? How do we talk about that? What's the value? Right? So it would be interesting to hear what folks are thinking, because I think.
And then, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I see on this slide it says reciprocal advancement through prevention, a good start. It is such a good place to start because so many of us are already doing this in some ways, but how do we talk about it and how do we be more strategic? So I think I'm looking and seeing things come through. So Anne says, well, it's essential that we promise that women and girls will be safer. I think we need to talk about a deeper change in our society where we're all healthier. So the promise of prevention is culture change.
Nice. Nice. Good. And then we can have a similar conversation about, well, when we think about culture change, what are the values that would reflect that culture change? Obviously, respect is one of those values. Caring is perhaps another one of those values. Honesty, accountability, doing no harm, so to speak. These become, when we know that when the culture has changed, we can readily read all of those values in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
Right.
And Rebecca says equity.
Okay, absolutely, yes, right? And we will be able to discern equity across the board in education, housing, jobs, health, right? We will be able to, it'll be palpable, right? We'll be able to sense it. How do we unmute? You hit *6.
Thank you. Sorry, so this is Kathleen. I'm the one who asked that. And I'm sorry, I just feel like I can articulate my thoughts a little bit better when I'm talking through it rather than typing. Something I think that I've actually been wrestling with, I'm fairly new to the RPE grant, is figuring out how primary prevention essentially and secondary and tertiary prevention of sexual violence works hand in hand, which I know this whole webinar series is really based around. But something that I've been thinking about is if we're able to partner up with these agencies that are working on secondary and tertiary prevention, and we are looking at the socio-ecologic model of risk factors through the RPE grant and just the premise of this project, it stands to reason that generationally, if people who are experiencing violence are receiving help and understanding the cultural change that needs to happen, that while we can't expect to see immediate results for prevention, we can expect in years and decades perhaps to see that play out so that those primary contributing factors will essentially be dismantled by the support and help that survivors, and not only survivors, but perpetrators are receiving through secondary and tertiary prevention. That's something I've been thinking about, and I'm not quite sure how that fits in with the rhetoric of RPE or anything, but it's something I've been thinking about. So I'd love to hear your insight on that.
Ashley, did you want to?
Yeah, so sorry, I lost my, we're having a lot of technical difficulties today, so I apologize. But Kathleen, so it sounds like what you were saying is if we are providing support to survivors of sexual violence or intimate partner violence, right, through secondary and tertiary prevention efforts, that down the line we will be kind of getting to some of those root causes of violence. And so is that what you were saying? I just want to make sure
she
that
says
I
yes,
was
exactly. She says yes,
okay.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is a really important conversation, and definitely fits into our understanding and kind of this conversation around this transformed movement and linking sexual and domestic violence, because we know that folks who are experiencing one type of violence will, you know, probably experience the other type. And so I would really love to hear what people think about Kathleen's comments and kind of the question that you were pondering, Kathleen. I think it's a good one. I think that it makes sense to me that we would see some of that, but would love to hear other folks. And so, you know, feel free to use the text chat, but also feel free, like Kathleen did, to come on, because this is a conversation to have. I don't think that there's any easy answer necessarily.
Well, and as people ponder that, if I could just offer this, the framework of primary, secondary, and tertiary, or universal, selected, and targeted, you know, whichever kind of iteration of that, of those paradigms, and suggests a nesting, if you will, of our intervention and advocacy work within a larger pool of prevention work, right? So then if we're saying that responding to rape victims and responding to domestic dating violence survivors is a thing unto itself as intervention and advocacy work, it absolutely is. And it draws tremendous attention and response, and should be. It's got a body of evidence and language and literature and everything. It is a thing unto itself. Linking it to prevention on some level means that it is nested within that, all of that then is situated within a larger field of prevention work. So now intervention and advocacy is now secondary prevention. So part of that tension that was mentioned or discussed earlier about between prevention and intervention work is some of that tension comes out of that. That tension is also rooted in other stuff too. But some of that tension comes out of the situating intervention within the larger framework of intervention. But in order for us to get to that eventual long-term change, I'm wondering to what degree do we have to modify our intervention work so that it leads to the outcome of this should not happen again. Mm-hmm. Right now, a lot of our crisis work is triage, stop the bleeding, getting people to healing and recovery so that they can just manage their lives, which is appropriate. But what happens if we do our intervention work with the outcome of ensuring that this type of violence does not occur again? That's a different set of tools with which we would go about doing intervention advocacy work.
Well, yeah, and I'm thinking about it too, Leah, in terms of like the idea of comprehensive prevention, right? Mm-hmm. That all of these pieces are so important in comprehensive prevention, but that what can sometimes get lost is primary prevention. And so we do have to be really diligent and thoughtful about making sure that primary prevention efforts are included in a more comprehensive strategy.
And that we don't like turn our pot into a blender. So.
Right.
So let's think about that. Let's think about the promise, the positioning, and the values of prevention in a linked and distinct movement, and then we can generalize or scale that up to the larger movement, the movement at large, which is both intervention, prevention, policy, media advocacy, all these different ways in which people can get involved, right? And then I'm going to, so let's think about some other work that's out there where people have been able to codify successful messaging, right? It's a shorthand. It is a way to trigger people's thinking, what's important about culture change, about a healthier society. So what are you thinking about? What's the promise, or what are the core values? I mean, I think that a lot of this really speaks to the values of each of these projects. But what are people thinking in terms of, is it helpful to think about either the larger movement as a brand and the messaging associated with that, or specifically narrowing the focus a little bit to just prevention and thinking about the branding and the messaging for prevention? Is this helpful? Yeah, Cassie, you're absolutely right, Karen. You're absolutely right. They had lots of money and lots of backing, but they also, I have to say, many of them were, well, they were responses out of kind of victimization or crisis. They really did. Certainly, the Mothers Against Drunk Driving comes out of that, and Click It or Ticket, I think, probably comes out of some, public health CDC work, and then the Truth Campaign. But I will also say this: these have been sustained efforts. They've been sending the same message for 40 years, right? The anti-tobacco work has been around public health has been long gestating, right? And so it's been a sustained effort with sometimes meager resources, but at other times, flush with dough. But one of the key elements that I want to emphasize here is that they had consistent messaging sustained over decades. So it's important that we're able to latch on to a message that really communicates the values, the promise, and the positioning of the brand, right? We want to make sure we have messaging that communicates the promise, values, and positioning of the brand in such a way that you eventually have culture change. That leads to policy remedies for these issues, that leads to practicum change, that leads to research, that will and eventually hopefully lead to big dollars, as Karen points out. Yeah, ooh, Karen, oh my goodness. What kind of crisis do we have to reach before we get those kinds of dollars? I don't know, but I think that one of the things that we can start to do is have a really good message and hammer away at it and be unrelenting about it and be consistent. How many years did we say no means no before it became part of cultural nomenclature, before it became like part of the lexicon? Have to consistently send this message that no means no. I think probably 40 years, right? But that's prevention, right? Prevention is like the long haul, right? Any other thoughts about this kind of messaging? Because I want to make sure that we have time for our guests on the call. So I took a stab, to use a violent metaphor, at thinking about if we were talking about the larger movement, right? In terms of reciprocal advancement is about unifying the fields for the betterment of both. Okay, So if we're thinking about some sample messaging, don't laugh. Don't laugh. It's not as catchy as click it or ticket, but or kind of like resonate personally the way that friends don't let friends drive around, because that's really an indictment. You know, when we think about the way in which public health has instructed us and taught us to in a universal approach, it's not just the person that is affected, but the people around the person that are also affected by these issues. And it's like, okay, now you're culpable if you let a friend drive drunk. So it's not as personally indicting as that, but when we think about moving forward together, or together for change, or connection creates change, you know, but whatever our messaging is, it's got to convey, it's got to extend that promise, the value, and the positioning. It should be brief, simplified. People should be able to relate to it or make it personable, and it should be inspirational, right? And so I ask all of you, do any of these examples pass? Do they you know, kind of speak to the ribbon, you know, our teal and purple ribbon? Any thoughts?
So, Leah, Karen says too big could mean anything, which
is
true, right? We're not pointing to anything in particular, but I'm also wondering if, because it almost seems to me like we need a way for practitioners who are in the field to talk about this issue, right? So we almost need our own messaging to kind of create this change, this transformation, and then we need more a more public-facing message. So I kind of see it as two separate messaging instances.
Okay, good. So Karen Webb says that it speaks to the collaboration, but not to the cause, the shared cause, right? Good. Yes. So, and Ann says that it's good to have to be simplified in the messaging, but there are several levels that we need to address it. And so I think that, you know, Ashley's point about there's our internal messaging and the way in which we think about this, and then there's the public-facing commentary, what we communicate, you know, publicly. The public, in some of the research that we looked at, the public doesn't even distinguish between domestic or intimate partner violence and sexual violence. They just think it's all the same. Like they put it in a blender, right? And so if we start talking about shared protective and risk factors to the public, eyes will glaze over. Okay, we think about universal or comprehensive prevention. That doesn't mean anything to the outward-facing public, but we need to know and be able to have the language and the knowledge to make our distinctions and to be more nuanced in our work. Then how do we take all of that nuance and simplify it so that we can say, just do it. Nike, just do it, right? Yeah, so we have to, as we're thinking about, there's our internal approach, and then there is what Ashley pointed out, and then there's how we take all of that and then deliver messaging that communicates to our various audiences, because it's not going to just be one audience, right? You know, there's a kind of a cultural competency that then gets triggered when we are marketing or messaging to different demographics. So there's a way in which McDonald's will generate advertising with big dollars for the African American community, which will be different than the way they will generate advertising for a Latino direct marketing. I mean, you know, targeted marketing compared to just, you know, any of the network channels, right? So but then there's the broader, and then there's ways in which we can refine and fine-tune. So let's think about our prevention work and along these lines with that nuance, but we can't get bogged down in it. That's why we hire advertising firms. Okay, thank you everyone for your feedback. It's a good thing that I have thick skin because, you know, that's why I don't work in that field. So Ashley, do you want to take us through this question, and then we're going to very quickly move on to our guests on the line today.
Yeah, we actually have a couple questions, but so we'll pose them, and then as you all think about them, and if you have things to add to them, we would love to hear those. So just looking at some of the ways that we identified that folks are already talking about sexual and intimate partner violence in a linked yet distinct way, how do we turn those strategies into messages that would then reflect this transformed movement or a new brand, if you will? So how do we turn the strategy to use intimate partner violence as an entry point to talk about sexual violence into a message? How do we turn these into messages rather than just strategies? So if you all have things to add, we would love to have you share those in the text chat. We also are wondering what examples of sexual and intimate partner violence prevention messaging come to mind. So examples of prevention messaging that's getting at both sexual and intimate partner violence. If you have examples of that, we would love to hear about that. And Meghna, if you would put these questions in the text chat, I'd appreciate it. Great. And then we'd also love to know about a success you've had related to intentionally linking sexual violence and intimate partner violence prevention in your own work. So if there's a success that you would share, we would love to hear about that. And so since I just bombarded you all with questions to think about, I want to move us over while you answer those and introduce our colleagues, our fellow practitioners from Ohio, because we're really lucky to be joined today by Lynn, India, and Rebecca, all from Ohio, representing the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence, the Ohio Domestic Violence Network as well. And so Lynn, India, and Rebecca, if you all would press *6 on your phone so you're not muted anymore. And
can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Wonderful. And India and Lynn, are you with us on the phone line? Yes, I'm here. Great. Thanks, India. And Lynn, how about you? Lynn, you might have to press *6 because we're not hearing you.
This is Lynn. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Wonderful.
All right.
All right, so I'm really excited to hear about all of the collaborative and strategic work that you're all doing in Ohio to simultaneously stop sexual violence and intimate partner violence before it occurs. And so I recently came across Ohio's story in the recently released RPE Stories from the Field from Safe States, and learned that Ohio created its first strategic plan for the prevention of sexual violence and intimate partner violence in 2009, and that was called Pathways to Prevention, a Roadmap for Change. And we'll put a link to where you can read that if you haven't already done so. But Lynn, India, and Rebecca, it sounds like you all have quite a long history of working collaboratively to further primary prevention in Ohio. And I'm wondering if you could just start off by sharing a bit about the background of that and how this collaboration really came to be.
Well, I think that's a question for me. This is Rebecca, and years ago, so back in 2003, ODVN became a Delta state. We were one of the recipients of the first round of Delta funding, and so we began developing our prevention capacity at that time. And a few years later, sadly and really tragically in Ohio, our sexual assault coalition closed its doors. And at that time, Deborah Seltzer, who was the administrator for the Rape Prevention Education Program, approached ODVN and asked us if we would apply to become the statewide technical assistants. And so at that time, we agreed to do that. And we did some due diligence. We let all the domestic violence programs in the state know that we were going to do that. Many of them, of course, were dual programs. And we also reached out to the rape crisis centers and had a conversation with them about what we needed to pay attention to as we moved our work forward. And then in 2005 or 2006, I'm not sure when exactly, Deborah approached us because the RPE program had to create a statewide plan, and at the same time, the Delta program had to create a statewide plan. And we just decided that rather than trying to create two plans, basically using the same subject matter experts in our state, that it made a whole lot of sense to sit down at the table and figure out how we could forward a shared plan in our state. So that's a short history of that.
Thanks, Rebecca. That's really valuable to hear about how that kind of started, because I think it's a great example of what we had talked about in session 1 around reciprocal advancement being a way to sustain the fields through a unified movement. So Leah, I don't know if you have any questions off the top. I wanted to also hear, because you all have collaborated in some other really key areas and have supported one another. And so I was hoping you could give some examples of some of that work. But Leah, did you have any first questions?
No, I wanna, we can keep going.
Great, wonderful. So Lynn, India, and Rebecca, can you share some of the other collaborative projects that you all are involved in?
Sure. One of the projects that we do annually, and there's actually two that we do annually, but I'll talk about a training and it's specific. It's called our Ready, Set, Go.
Can we clarify who's speaking? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. This is Lynn.
Okay, thank you.
I'm the prevention coordinator with the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. Sorry about that. And one training that we hold annually is called Ready, Set, Go, and it's set up in like a boot camp fashion mainly for new advocates in the field who want to learn more about prevention. We also open it up to others who want to just relearn or brush up on primary prevention. And we hold that annually, usually in the spring. We invite everybody from all over Ohio who wants to come and learn more about primary prevention. And recently we've been opening that up to other disciplines. For example, this year we also invited folks from the human trafficking side to come and learn more about primary prevention. So that's one example of something we do annually.
That's great. So with that training in particular, I'm wondering what have you seen as your biggest success?
I think the biggest success we've seen is the ability to get people talking about primary prevention and understanding that in all of the work that they're doing across the state, and whichever discipline that is. We've seen it grown from year to year, just the amount of people that want to attend this training. I see that as a success. The evaluations really show that participants value the information. They feel like it's something they can take back and use in the roles that they're playing at their programs or organizations.
Great. And how does the Alliance to End Sexual Violence and the Domestic Violence Network, what are the roles that both the organizations play in that training?
Well, we each have a facilitator from each side. I'm the facilitator from the Alliance. India is the facilitator from the Domestic Violence Network. And Rebecca has also been a facilitator as well. So we do it in collaboration.
Okay. And I also understand that you all do a joint statewide conference every year. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that, the success around doing a joint conference?
Sure. That is another annual conference. We hold it every June. The planning committee consists of the Alliance, the Domestic Violence Network, the Ohio Department of Health. We're all part of the planning committee. And what we do is we look at ways that we can invite prevention programs who are funded throughout the state, as well as other advocates, to talk about, to bring in prevention principles, topics that are culturally specific, concepts and practices related to establishing collaborations around the state, strategic planning, and we do that annually. We just had a meeting today to talk about what we're looking at for our conference this June coming up.
Wonderful. And then I see, so on the screen we're looking at on the slide, and I apologize that the Domestic Violence Network's logo is, I'm seeing double vision. I don't know about you all, but we'll get that fixed. But I see that the Ohio Men's Action Network, that logo. Can you talk a little bit about that project and how I believe that all three entities, including the health department, is involved in that project?
Right, so this is India, and I'm the prevention coordinator at ODVN, and I'm also the coordinator for OMAN. And so basically, when that was started, yes, it was from the people at OASV and staff from ODH, and then ODVN that came together to create Ohio Men's Action Network. And you have staff from each organization that still sits on the steering committee, and where we all work to engage men throughout Ohio in the prevention of sexual and intimate partner violence, which is our mission for OMAN actually is to end sexual and relationship violence throughout Ohio. So I know for me in doing OMAN, I came here, I joined ODVN back in 2013, so and OMAN was founded back in 2012, so we were both fairly new, OMAN and myself, when I took it on. And just as I said on the phone to Ashley last week, because when I came to ODVN, the relationships between the Alliance, ODVN and ODH was so strong, and it never really dawned on me that the collaboration was something special. It felt normal, if that makes sense. So doing our work together, whenever I think of the new activities that OMAN is doing, for me to make sure I incorporate both sexual violence and domestic violence is a natural thing now, because honestly that's all I've been taught is to make sure with OMAN that I keep both of those things in mind. So.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, India. Yeah, I mean, I think when we talked about the work that you all are doing, that was kind of a big takeaway for me, that you don't see addressing one issue without addressing the other in your prevention work. So thank you for sharing that. Well, have there been, and this is a question for all of you, it sounds like you're sharing a lot of resources, you're sharing staff in many ways. What about funding opportunities? Has there been any of that that's come up?
Well, this is Rebecca again, and thank you for asking that, Ashley. Yeah, back in, I think it was 2012 or 2013, the Avon Foundation, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Oh, good. I was getting a weird beeping on my phone. Pardon me for that. The Avon Foundation issued a request for proposals from across the country, and ODVN contemplated responding, and the request was for sexual violence separate from domestic violence, separate from child abuse, separate from some other issue and teen dating violence. So there were 4 issue areas, and you could apply for 1 or all 4 or 2 or however many you wanted to apply for. And we sat down and started outlining what we thought would be an interesting proposal to do, online training for bystander intervention for employees and employers. And almost immediately after we sat down at ODVN and started outlining a proposal, we were confronted with the fact that there is no way you could do this work without collaborating with sexual violence. So we reached out to our sister coalition and we offered a proposal that was funded. So we received half of the funding to combine efforts in Ohio, and we created the See the Signs and Speak Out training program. And that is a subdomain of ODVN's website. So if you go to odvn.org and page down and click on speakout.odvn.org, you'll get to that training program. And so we really, out of that project, we figured out how we could hire staff and supervise staff collaboratively. So we hired a consultant, we supervised a consultant, we had a group of subject matter experts that came from both the domestic violence world and the sexual violence world, and we worked on this project for a year, and it was amazing, and we have a really great product, I think, that's being used in our state and across the nation and across the world for employers who want to train employees about how to respond when they think domestic violence is happening, and also how to prevent it from happening in the first place. So this project really sort of does span that whole continuum from what happened, how do you respond when something is happening in front of you, to what are the kinds of things that you can do to interrupt it and keep it from happening in the first place.
That's a really great example, Rebecca, and I put a link to the web page where folks can find more information on that project. So another thing that I wanted you all to talk a little bit about is be the one to prevent sexual and intimate partner violence. And this project, I believe, has come out of a larger prevention consortium in Ohio. Is that right?
That's correct. A subcommittee of the consortium worked together to come up with some kind of messaging that could be used by every program in Ohio that did not or wanted to have some type of branding messaging. And I think it really kind of works across all of those systems, like sexual violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence. Anything can be attached to our Be the One logo and what it means. And we have it set up so that there's one that says Be the One to Prevent, and then there's other ones that are also, their taglines attached to it, so people can use them how they see fit. And it was really a project that a lot of local programs assisted with, so that it was something that can be used in their local programs. So after the phase one was completed, when we picked out the actual Be the One, we've also expanded it now. With the last phase of it, we're doing some social media messaging as well. So we have some things on Facebook, we have some, we have Instagram, we have some commercials running that will be running soon on Pandora. We have some billboards going up in certain parts of the state. So it's really something that can be used all across our state, not just with the Alliance or with the Domestic Violence Network.
Great. It's really
and Lynn,
oh, yeah, go ahead, Rebecca.
This is Rebecca again, and this is one of the projects that I think is really interesting, because this is an example of how resources have been leveraged to expand a single message to be inclusive and to really reflect on our collaboration and the like. So, and the consortium that Lynn mentioned is our Ohio Sexual and Intimate Partner Violence Prevention Consortium, and that's where our community of practice works and meets. You know, we come together twice a year in a full meeting, and usually there's somewhere around 40 to 50 people in that at the meeting, and then work goes on in between meetings, and this Be the One campaign came out of one of those strategic directions.
Great. Well, and I think that when I look at this logo and I read the words, and so I think about the message behind it, Leah, it kind of reminds me of your slide where you talked about moving forward together, right? Because it really embodies that that we're in this together. We're moving forward together in Ohio to prevent sexual and intimate partner violence. So I think it's a really great example. Thank you all so much for sharing that. I'm just wondering for all three of you, Lynn, India, and Rebecca, so it seems like there's been a lot of success with your collaboration and being able to leverage resources and staff on these various projects. But what do you think helped you be successful? Like, what did you need from your partners in order to be successful? What did you need in terms of leadership to be successful? What has helped this collaboration and this relationship and this kind of idea of having each other's backs continue? And that's a question for any of you.
And if I could just add to that, you know, and in keeping with what we've been talking about, like in order to come up with this kind of messaging for Be the One to Prevent, and then people can fill in that kind of thing, in order to come up with that, what did you have to overcome? I mean, a couple of people mentioned in the chat boxes, you know, we had to stop making one issue more important than the other. We had to find ways to resolve tensions between, you know, prevention and intervention, or resolve tensions between sexual and domestic dating and intimate partner violence. We had to resolve those tensions. And so how did you overcome that? How would you define the meaning of the collective as opposed to the constitutive part? So what did you overcome to get to this?
So this is Rebecca again, and for me, this is not the logo that I liked. So I had to give up being right. You know, and I really, and I think that that's what we have to be able to give up. We have to be able to give up being right about what we're being right about, that one issue is more important than another, or one logo is better than another. If the majority of people go in one direction that's not the direction that I'm going in, it's my responsibility as a collaborator to be able to say, well, it's more important for the whole to be served rather than my special interest. And sometimes that's a challenge, quite frankly. But I think it makes us stronger when we can do that.
Thank you for saying that. I think that when we were doing the research around reciprocal advancement, there was a lot of fear. People talked a lot about fear that working more closely together across the aisle, as you know, if you will, would suddenly mean a loss in their own identity as an issue, and so people brought up a lot of, like, what the issue, what's important to me is going to get drowned out by kind of like the larger conversation. And so when you said that, Rebecca, it reminded me of that people are really concerned that there will be somehow a loss, like giving up your, you know, letting go of the one that you preferred. Does that mean that you are somehow losing your distinctiveness or what's important to the work that you do by going with the larger consensus has picked?
Is that a question?
No, I was just a follow-up. But if there were other people who had other things that from Ohio that either India or Lynn could speak to, like what had to be overcome to talk about the prevention, you know, to get to this this point. I did want to ask Rebecca, was the messaging the same, or was it just the design that you didn't like? Or was there a completely different message you preferred?
You know what? I can't even remember now. I just know that this wasn't my preference.
Okay.
Hi, this is India, and I think I can talk about what I witnessed that I liked. And when we were voting on the logo, one thing that I liked that I witnessed the group do is that there was a lot of trust there. So with the communications work group, it was trusted that that group of state program people and local program people, they met, they hashed out a lot of the details, and we trusted that that each side was represented in that work group. And so when they brought out their final choices for us to vote on, it wasn't too much of a conversation that went back and forth because the level of trust that I've seen from each side. And so when there was some pushback from one logo, or there was some other things, what came with that trust was that everyone was listening to the feedback, and they took it back, and they, with the work group, and they worked out some of that feedback until we all got something that everyone agreed on. And so, and that was, and I say what I witnessed because I wasn't a part of the work group, but I was at the meeting when we did vote on the logo that we all liked. So that was one thing that I just really appreciated was the level of trust of there's a work group there. We trust that all of our views are going to be shared, and they're going to bring back a finished product. So.
This is Lynn, and I would agree with India and Rebecca. I would only add that I think the communication part was a big piece in that even though not everybody agreed on the logo or the design, everybody there at the table wanted the messaging. They wanted something that can be used across the state and could grow. So I think with the trust and the communication, it just all made sense that people would give up what they loved for something that they could actually work with and use.
Amen.
So I have a question in the last 7 minutes that we have. Ashley, am I allowed to ask this question?
You are, Leah. Go for it.
Okay. So in terms of, looking at the logo, can we have a conversation either on your phones for like 3 minutes or respond in the chat box? When you see this logo and you hear the messaging, are there certain values? Are there certain distinctions from other projects that are similarly inclined that come to mind? Or do we get what the promise? What's the promise of this brand? If eventually the wording recedes and all we have is the circle and the number 1 and the word prevent, however that you eventually receive the messaging, are we clear about what this brand means? I think that Lynn made a very good point, which is that the messaging needed to be something that people could take away and use, that it had to be usable. As an exercise of people, what are people thinking about, as a brand, what comes to mind for you when you see this? Now, you've been given insight into the backstory of the imaging, like how it came into being and that there were struggles and then they finally resolved on this, but now if you are on the this is the public-facing piece. So there was all the internal conversation that happened, but this is now the public-facing piece. And if this is the brand for this particular effort, what kind of meaning do you take away from looking at this? If it's speaking to you, what is it telling you? What do you think you're supposed to do? Oh, Deborah says that it's important that it be positive, that it's real clear in terms of like what you stand for as opposed to what you stand against, or is that what you mean, Deborah? Like, that it be achievable, that it be inspirational, uplifting, that people feel like they can do it. Yeah, good. Okay, good. Other thoughts, like what does it mean to you? Don't cheat by looking at the words. Other thoughts?
If you'd rather vocalize that over the phone, you just need to press *6. Otherwise, you can type it into the text chat.
Because I'm wondering, how will all of you go back to your state-run agencies or your local programs or local organizations and engage in a process that advances both issues together, right? Imagining how will you come up with a unifying message that ties things together. And so if you see that this is about individuals becoming part of a collective to take action. That's what it's speaking to. It's speaking to people getting involved. To me, that's what I take away from it, as opposed to no means no. It's not okay to batter. It's not speaking directly to the act of the violence per se, as opposed to mobilizing individuals to get involved for the prevention of the actions.
Well, and I think, Leah, I wish I could take this logo with me to the next slide, but we do have this last discussion question that I think speaks to this, and that's how can clear messaging create new paths for sexual and intimate partner violence prevention? So, if that's a question that speaks more to you to answer, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, this
because go ahead. What were you going to say? Well, if I could just real quickly, because in the interest of time, because it's important to make that distinction that we're not telling people don't rape, don't batter, but we're telling people get involved to end or prevent rape and battering from occurring. That's a very clear distinction, particularly around a conversation when we're talking about prevention, right? So when you're thinking along those lines and unifying and working collectively, or being linked yet distinct, that kind of approach can create new pathways for the prevention of sexual and intimate partner violence. Mm-hmm. It will open up other opportunities for the prevention of intimate partner violence and sexual violence. So it's that particular kind of shift in what we're looking at, and then developing succinct, portable, usable messaging to mobilize people is what's so powerful about that logo.
Mm-hmm. Which I will go back to.
Well, this is India, and I would say one cool thing that I could think of more recently that this project came about is our most recent conversations around how working with other movements is important to us, other social justice things, and how we're incorporating more social justice issues into our joint work, and just how we're going to use, one suggestion was to use this logo not only to, for sexual and the domestic violence prevention, but ways to promote those issues within our work as well. So that's one clear way that has, created a new path here in Ohio, is that, and it's one thing that I'm super excited about, because, it's really going into a direction that we all agree is really important, and the prevention is working with those other issues as well. So that's one way that's one new path that we are walking down right now, and I say walking intentionally. But so, and that's one really exciting thing that has came out of this.
Nice.
Thank you, India. Yeah, that's awesome to hear. And Deborah said that Karina and I are also talking about the extent to which ultimately this needs to be a message in each local community, because that's really where the change and those shifts happen. But India and Lynn, thank you so much for sharing that important piece about being able to really use this to expand and to bring in those other issues that we know are all linked to what we're trying to prevent with sexual and intimate partner violence. So thank you so much for that. Well, it's hard to believe, but we are out of time. We asked you so many questions, and we'd love to be able to, if you kind of think about, other ways that you're imagining or answers to any of these questions, we'd love to be able to capture some of those in our next and final session. So maybe we'll start off with doing that since we packed in a lot today. But thank you all so much. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Ohio team, for joining us and for your willingness to share the work that you're doing and all of this great collaboration. You will automatically be registered for the third session, and you'll receive a confirmation for that. But Leah, I don't know if you have any closing thoughts. I just want to let everyone know that we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll be putting this recording up on the website within a couple days, and we'll let you know.
Thank you, everyone. Talk to you next week. Be safe.
Take care. Yes,
be
have
healthy.
a wonderful rest of your Wednesday.
Bye-bye.
Bye. You got it? Okay, awesome. I know, one box. I don't understand why it does that.